Everybody, this is Mark Smith with Family Tree. We have a very special guest tonight over my shoulder. That's Pam. And Pam is an expert on EMDR. She'll explain her expertise soon. She got expertise the hard way by doing the work. And she has an amazing, riveting story that's really powerful. Other than some blogging, this is her first appearance nationally and internationally. So you're in for a real treat. Pam is a great communicator, and she has a real powerful story. What's up, Sideways? Couple of announcements, and I'm going to turn the camera closer to Pam. Can you see Pam okay? Everybody, can you tell us? Or is it? Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Nothing, no.
Yes. Okay, they can see us okay. All right, so one is, we're not, I had a couple of you do as you always do, and you sent in questions for me. And I'm not going to be able to answer the questions, making myself shorter, tonight. I'll save those for next week. So what we'd like you to do tonight is to hold off on questions for the first half an hour, 45 minutes. And then after Pam tells her story, then you can, start sending in questions that she can answer, okay, related to her EMDR healing experience and her recovery. The second thing is those of you who are interested in our new Family Tree brand Life Coaches Training Program, just email me, and we're going to be putting the email address on the chat stream. And there's also a video. There it is. Watch that video and then email me if you're interested in the training. So it's Pam's turn to tell her story. I'm going to bring the camera a little closer and switch it closer to her if I can. Okay, so Pam, tell us your story.
Okay, first I wanted to start with a thank you to Mark for two reasons. And the first is for guiding me through my recovery. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and when I first started to have to come to terms with it, I was completely lost. And Mark, I don't know what I would have done without his guidance, his gentle pushing at times, and his encouragement to actually try EMDR. I also want to thank him because it became very clear to me when I first started to come to terms with the fact that I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, that within the absolute worst thing that ever happened to me was a gift. And that gift is being able to use my story and my experience to help other people. And so Mark is giving me an opportunity to do that. And if you're watching, you're giving me the opportunity to do that as well. I'm going to, and I've thought a lot about where do I start. And I'm going to start at the point where I started to realize that my father has narcissistic personality disorder. That was roughly 18 months ago. I had cut contact with him because we had been through a series of healthcare crises, and I was trying to help him manage through, and his behavior was just unbearable. I didn't know what to do, and I finally I think that you'll find if you've ever met anybody who has had to cut contact with a parent, it's a last resort. And as I explored why there were, other evil people out there who had cut contact with a parent, what kept on coming as a recurring pattern was narcissistic personality disorder. And to give you a sense of how bad my denial is, my father had actually been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder roughly 30 years ago, and I promptly just sort of put that aside. So I had to start to come to terms with the fact that he had this disorder. And as I was doing that, I started to journal certain behaviors of his. And I'll toss a couple of recent ones out. One was that he flashed me because he thought it would be funny, he told me. He used a urinal in my dining room while my husband and his sister were in the next room. There's literally a bathroom like 10 to 15 feet from there. So I don't know why he, chose to do something like that. I thought, what, I really need to go back to my childhood and pull up some examples. And when I went back to my childhood, I had almost no memories at all. I don't remember what my father looked like. I don't remember sitting on his lap. I don't remember playing with him. I don't remember him touching me. I don't remember having a conversation with him. I also don't remember my mother. I remember, tiny little bits and snippets of things, but it's almost as if I'm reading a story about someone else because I have no emotional, I don't have, those normal connections of, remembering I felt this way or that sort of thing. I didn't have that. And I knew that that was odd. And I spoke to my sister about it, and she and I, kind of exchanged some memories from childhood, and she reminded me of the time that my father claimed he was going to run for president. He created his own political party. It was the Tea Party, so he was way ahead of his time. And I have to admit that at this point in time, I was really frustrated with the lack of memories, but, nothing I did was helping them surface, and I just sort of let it go. About 3 months later, I decided I needed to find a therapist. I was really struggling with some guilt, trying to figure out whether or not this severing of the relationship with my father was something that should be permanent. And I found Mark, and I specifically selected Mark because of his experience in dealing with personality disorders. And so I started to see Mark as my therapist, and he helped me to understand that my father's behavior was harming me. My father, when I was a child, was very abusive to my mother verbally, sometimes physically, and there was so much denial of how that behavior was impacting me. So then Mark and I started working on some other issues. And during that period, one day I had this intuitive sense that something terrible had happened to me. And I couldn't remember what, but I knew something terrible had happened to me. It was very strange. I had never had this happen before. But again, there were no memories, and I let it go. And around that time, too, I started to have fear. When I went to bed at night, there would be, and actually, no, it's not this door, it's that door. There would start to be a circle of, when I went to bed, the room would be dark, there would be a circle of light around my door, and it terrified me. I couldn't understand why it was making me afraid, but I knew that I was afraid of whatever was on the other side of that door, and it just didn't make any sense. I mean, I'm married. My husband is a wonderful guy. I was just baffled. And then I started to have nightmares about my father. And it was, well, the nightmares themselves were odd, but it was odd for me to have any dreams about him. I really didn't dream about him much. And in one of the nightmares, he was trying to force me to perform oral sex on him. And it was so disturbing that it woke me up. But my denial was really strong, and yet again, I just said, you know what, just gonna ignore that. I did mention it to Mark, and Mark kind of stopped me, and he said, I don't want to alarm you, but sometimes when you have a dream like that, it's your subconscious telling you that it happened. It was, probably one of the most unsettling things I ever had to consider. But I was nowhere near ready to accept that it was possible. And it started me putting together puzzle pieces that were just creating an absolutely horrifying, worse than a Stephen King novel story. But I had had some issues all of my life, and one of them has been that I don't like people to touch me. I even sometimes when my husband touches me, I just have this sense of violation. And so, it was hard because intellectually I knew that it had happened, but I wasn't ready to accept it at all. I started to have intense nausea, and Mark will remember us having therapy sessions while I was holding a bucket.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was not pretty. I also started to have, for the first time, anxiety attacks. And then I started to have flashbacks, which, again, were something that I had never experienced before. And they were just absolutely bizarre. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was getting snippets of senses, like I would have a flash of an image. I would have a feeling like touching my father's waxy skin. And I had a dream which was really just terrifying. I only felt the sensation as if I had a child's body and was being lifted up on the bed, and then I had the sense of somebody laying on top of me and pinning me down. And I was so terrified I woke up. Around that time, I was really, trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was having these flashbacks. They didn't make any sense. So either I was going crazy, or I had been molested and I was, going through the trauma. My sister was the one who helped me get the first time to accept that I had been sexually abused. What happened was she reminded me that probably around, 3-4 years ago, at my mother's house, I was helping her move along with my sister and brother-in-law, and I was intensely nauseous. In fact, I kept on going outside. I had dry heaves. It was very ugly. I even got nauseous driving there. And my sister reminded me of this, and I had forgotten it, but that house was the house that I lived in from the time that I was born until I was about 9. And when I was around 6 or 7, my father had an office in that space. And I knew when she told me that my symptoms were not new. I had thought, well, maybe I was just falling for this power of suggestion. But it became clear at that point that I had had symptoms for much longer than I had known Mark. And I decided that day, it was May 7th, I'm going to accept this. And so I did for about a day, and then I went back into denial. Then I, at Mark's encouragement, saw a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. So now I was having to cope both with, I have this chronic disorder, and I was sexually abused as a child. It was just really overwhelming. And when I told her I had no memories, she said to me, "You do have memories. Those flashbacks, those are memories." Again, it was still very hard to accept. One of the things that I'm going to recommend it if you are working through your own trauma, Mark had recommended a book to me by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And it helped me to understand, Dr. van der Kolk is one of the leading experts on healing trauma. And the book really helped me to understand how trauma affects the brain, and why repressed memories happen, because I have to admit that I had read some stuff online about, and it was, there are places online that will claim that that repression doesn't really exist, which is total BS. You'll find that if you look at some of the experts in the field of trauma, they'll explain exactly why it is that things like repression and flashback memories, all of those things happen in reaction to trauma, and it's well documented and very well studied. Mark had also recommended to me trying yoga and meditation, and I have to admit that I was willing to try absolutely anything because I felt terrible. Over the summer, I started taking the meds for PTSD. I was feeling a little better, but then I was feeling a little worse. As part of, and I believe this was part of my PTSD, I, for some reason, started having this compulsion to cut myself, and my mind was telling me it would feel good. I did not do it, but it was something that was just constantly at me, and I had the same intrusive thoughts about suicide. I was not planning in any way to commit suicide, but my head would tell me sometimes, just jump off that balcony. I was really struggling. I was trying to work and finding that it was next to impossible. And I decided to try EMDR. In addition to Mark, I had met some folks who had also suffered from trauma, and they said it was really effective. So I found the most experienced person in my area. She's been doing EMDR for more than 10 years, so that would be one of my recommendations if you are planning to try EMDR, eye movement desensitization and recovery therapy.
So, Pam, wasn't she the only practitioner in your area?
Within probably a, 20-30 mile radius.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. And so I contacted her and I said, I don't really have many memories, but do you think you can work with me? And she said yes. So I made an appointment, and I was a little disappointed because it took probably 2-3 intake sessions before we started. And I'll explain, when you do EMDR, EMDR works through pulsing. So you'll have a right and a left pulse, and what it does is it stimulates both sides of the brain, and it gets them talking to each other. so that your traumatic memories, which are really stored in the wrong place and in a wrong way, and that's why they cause the symptoms of PTSD, are transferred to the other side of your brain, which is where normal memories are stored. And by doing that, it takes out the emotional charge. And so that's how EMDR works. The pulsing can be done through light, it can be done through sound, or it can be done through touch. I actually do a combination of light and touch. It, for me, kind of puts me in a somewhat trance-like state. And it will, the memories that it pulls out are not like video. Sometimes they're actually body memories, and your body will start to move and do the things that your body was doing at the time that you're, kind of going back and trying to recollect. So I started doing the EMDR with with the local EMDR therapist, and she said, let's approach this with an open mind. We don't know for certain whether or not you were molested, who did it. I was actually delighted because I kept on looking for someone to tell me it didn't happen. Which has, alas, I think that the only one who ever has any denial these days would be me, and it's, kind of a quick flicker. Very quickly, actually, my EMDR therapist was taken aback at how quickly I was able to recover memories. The first session, I think, that we did, we went into the space where I had moved my mom and had gotten so nauseous. And in doing the EMDR, I thought about going downstairs into that space. And when I got to the space that was the bedroom, which contained a dark room at the time, I couldn't go in. I was so afraid I could not go in that room. I felt like icy coldness running through my limbs. I was trembling. My heart was absolutely pounding. I felt fear like I have never felt fear before. I couldn't get into, we tried several times, and finally the therapist had me imagine, and I had to have two people. I had my husband on one side and my sister, who is my best friend too, on the other. And with them, I was able to go into that room. And what happened there is I went in the dark room with my dad, and he was tickling me. And then he opened his pants, and he made me touch him. I have to say, in a lot of ways, it just completely shattered me. Until then, I could deny that it happened. And it, just took away my ability to do that. And that's one of the things that I will say about EMDR therapy, is that it's not linear. And sometimes you feel worse. You just have to keep at it. And ultimately you will feel better. But, sometimes it's tough. As I continued to do the therapy, and I was only doing it once a week, I was pulling out more and more memories, and it was brutal. I got into this identity crisis. I kind of lost who I was, because the person who I had thought I was for over 50 years, I wasn't that person. I didn't know who I was. Yeah. I had to, rethink my entire history. My, my mother and father, that, happy little family that we had, that was all a lie. The person who gave me away at my wedding wasn't who I thought he was. And it was kind of that, and, just starting to deal with some really horrific memories that pushed me to a place that Mark had warned me I was going to hit. And I ended up having to take a medical leave of absence from work. And it was very good that I was able to do that. Mark also encouraged me to start doing EMDR more often. So I started to do EMDR 3 times a week, which was tough.
Pam, let me interject here. Upon my recollection, it wasn't so much that you were having a breakdown as you were practicing self-care. You had the option to really dig in and get a lot of work done, and you had the family time off. But to me, my memory wasn't, hey, this lady needs, psychiatric care because she's cracking apart. It was more, here's a courageous warrior who's ready to take time off to dig deep into her healing her wounds.
Well, that's flattering, Mark, but I have to say, as I look back, what I will say is, people have always said to me, you always are able to hold it together, and that's an act, and it was self-care, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm almost done, but it was really needed, and I think that's one of the important things, to be able to look and say, you know what, I need to focus on myself, and Mark strongly encouraged me to do that. So I started doing the EMDR more frequently. I'm going to share this, and it's really hard to say. One of the things I feared most was what my father did to me. And what my father did to me, and I know it's what he did to me because my body goes through the motions, is he forced me to perform oral sex on him, which is a form of rape. He did it numerous times, and through EMDR and kind of connecting it to the various bedrooms I had when I was a child. It probably went on between the time that I was roughly 6 or 7 and the time I was around 9 or 10. And because of the amount of abuse that I suffered, and also the nature of it, which being raped is really traumatizing to a child. They don't understand what's happening. So I was traumatized, really traumatized. But it was amazing because within, I don't know, a month and a half, I really started to improve. I had been at a point where I couldn't go into a grocery store because it would trigger anxiety attacks so bad that I had to leave. And I started to improve. I started to have much less anxiety, and hope started to come back. And I started to realize who I was again. And yeah, it wasn't who I thought it was, but what I will say is, and in a really nice way, I'm a total badass.
That's right.
And I'm a badass because I made it this far in life. A lot of people who suffer from this kind of trauma commit suicide or overdose on drugs or alcohol. It's not easy. And the courage and the resilience and the strength that it took to go through the EMDR process and just that recovery period, and EMDR wasn't the only thing I did. I just there's not really that much in life you go through that makes you tougher. I'm actually back at work part-time.
Hey, Pam, let me back up. We have a question from CD. He or she says, if it's not too painful, can you expand on, did your dad use threats or verbal coercion to make you touch him, and how old were you?
So let me go through this. Yeah, I think I was probably the first time around 6 or 7. As far as coercion, I think that he slowly built up things, and this gets really kind of gruesome, but in speaking with my EMDR therapist and just knowing, what my body went through, he kind of trained me, which is just, I can't even. He did threaten me. In fact, Mark, and you'll remember this, when I would attempt to talk about my abuse, I would lose my voice.
Can I talk about that?
Yeah.
Rest your voice for just a second while I talk about your voice. Probably for several months, as Pam was unpacking these memories, we can use your therapist's first name, can't we?
Mm-hmm.
EMDR, Lynn. Her name is Lynn. I never knew if Pam was going to be whispering during her sessions, because her vocal cords would constrict, and many times I could barely hear her during our therapy sessions because the memories were impacting her vocal cords.
Yeah, Mark, and I think that and again, it's hard because when the traumatic memories come out, they don't come out like a videotape. So you often will get bits and pieces, and sometimes you get image, and sometimes you get body sensations. I'm pretty sure that my father, of course, he had to have told me not to tell, and it was my vocal cords that somehow were hearing that.
Right.
So, yeah. I just wanted to say one thing, and I wanted to say to everybody who's listening who has suffered through trauma, you're a badass too. You just need to find your inner badass.
Pam, I think that might be a good name for a book. Find your inner badass. I like it.
So I'm done, and we can do questions.
Well, let's back up. So you guys can start texting in questions, but I have some questions for you, Pam. First of all, it's clear, Robert says, the badass seal of approval. It's clear how much healing you've done, that you can talk about such things and not be breaking down and overwhelmed and re-traumatized. Obviously, you're having some emotion come up, but so can you talk about how many EMDR sessions you've had? Because I know probably the average is 6 to 10-ish, and then also talk about the exhaustion and the need for a nap. Talk about the number and then the napping.
Sure. I actually lost count. I used to say it was over 60, but I suspect we're probably coming up on 70. I don't want that to scare anybody, because how many sessions you need often has to do with how much you were traumatized. And honestly, I don't know, how many times this happened, but enough that I needed 70 sessions. And I'm still not done. In terms of the exhaustion, there's something about the EMDR process, and I've talked to other people and I've looked at stuff online. It is similar to, I think, REM sleep. And so it often will make people very sleepy. My recommendation would be, if you are doing EMDR and you're working, schedule it for the end of the day so that you have time to rest afterwards. I think for me too, it was exhausting because of what I was having to pull out and go through. I thought I had, a nice normal life, and honestly, my childhood was horrific. And it just made me exhausted. I was sleeping probably like 12 hours a day. And that would be the other thing I would say. If you need to sleep 12 hours a day as you're, processing what happened to you, do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes Pam would follow a EMDR session with a session with me or with me and Karen. And if she didn't get her nap in, that was a really rough day, and the sessions were harder.
Yeah, I'm sure it showed.
So, Pam, could you talk about the process of how were memories unearthed? I have the sense that you weren't going looking for memories, that somehow, between the skill of the therapist and just what was coming up for you, it's like there were little threads and you just pull on the little threads that came up. But how did you use EMDR to come up with the memories that you did come up with?
That's sort of the $1 million question. My therapist said I'm fortunate, and it doesn't feel very fortunate, that I was able to recover the amount that I did. For some people, EMDR does allow you to tap into memories because it's somewhat of a safe place for your brain, because your brain knows that it's going to transfer the stuff over, and so it's able to pull stuff out. And yes, we kind of did go searching, and the reason that we went searching was simply and EMDR is not probably an appropriate treatment method to try to unearth memories. You really use it to reduce the anxiety and depression and some of the other symptoms of PTSD, not to recover memories, but you often will have to recover memories in order to process the trauma. And so I'm still sometimes recovering memories. I wish I didn't have to, but when I continue to have anxiety, we have to try to find, you've talked about that thread. Where is it coming from?
Yeah.
And when you have to start tracing where it's coming from, and my therapist is very skilled at doing this, often you will find that it attaches to something that you really wish you didn't have to know.
Yeah.
I kind of felt after about 3 weeks of recovering memories being abused, that was enough. I knew more than enough. But the process requires you to process it.
So we have a question from Jackie that sort of fits here, Pam. She says, is it always necessary to bring these memories to the surface? What if your mind can't handle it?
I think that you'd really need to talk to an EMDR therapist about that. What I can say about me is that there are memories that I can't handle. When it comes to the sexual abuse, what my father did to me, I can only have body sensations. I do not have visual memory. Now, part of that probably is because I dissociated, which is like you sort of, somehow your mind shuts off. I would actually put it this way, and I've heard this, that your brain won't recover anything that you are incapable of handling.
Nice. Yeah. There's some biblical reference to God isn't going to give you more than you can handle. And I don't know about you, Pam, but I've questioned the veracity of that scripture many times.
Well, yes, the old cliche, I sometimes wish that God didn't have so much faith in me.
Right. Another question from Faye. How long was your EMDR process? I guess from first session, and I know you're still doing it. So how many months have you been at this?
I started, I think like the last week of August or so, and I'm still doing the sessions. And the sessions themselves are generally an hour. The EMDR portion of it is usually done in pretty short snippets. So you might do EMDR for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then, have some talk therapy. And some of the sessions I did were as long as maybe 90 minutes, but never really longer than that.
Okay, so another question from CD regarding the voice. When you were small, did you try to tell anybody? And if you did anybody listen to you?
This is tough because I still don't have memories of being a child very much. I'm pretty sure that the way the abuse stopped is I threatened to yell for help.
Right.
Because we went through that. We decided it was something that we needed to explore. And so I'm pretty sure that I threatened to yell for help, but I was probably around 9 or 10 at that point. As far as threatening to tell as a child, I don't remember, but what I can say is I do know that I did not know what was happening to me. I just knew it made me feel violated, absolutely terrified, and it's possible that I actually repressed it immediately after it happened. So I knew that something horrible, was bothering me, but I didn't really know details.
Yeah. There's a question that I'm going to answer, and you can jump in and answer, Pam. Jill, I can never get her name right. Jill again. She asked, is it possible for people to have false memories? And I can say this, that Pam was all for that theory, that these were all false memories. And so several things. One, neither myself or the EMDR therapist, we didn't have any dogs in the hunt. We weren't trying to manufacture that Pam was sexually abused at all. We were just pulling at threads that were presenting themselves. But to answer your question, yeah, there was a movement a couple of decades ago where well-meaning but misguided therapists who probably had their own unresolved sexual abuse issues, they were pressuring people, and there were people who through the pressure of a therapist, had some false memories, and then they later realized that they were false. But this with Pam, there's about 0.0% chance that any of it is false. If you could have just seen the pain in her face and her voice being gone, you're looking at one of the strongest, most courageous people on the planet. And none of the memories were false in this case.
Mark, thank you. I don't know that I would say I'm one of the most strong and courageous people on the planet, but I'm flattered. There are a couple of things that I do want to say. If you've been diagnosed with PTSD, you cannot give yourself PTSD. There's no way to imagine your way into PTSD. You have to be traumatized. Traumatic memories also, you wouldn't know how to make up a traumatic memory. And so an expert can tell simply by the way your memories are popping up. No one wants more than I do for this to have not happened.
That's true.
You would have to be, and my psychiatrist said this to me, she said, you would have to be very mentally ill to have, made this up in your mind, and you have no history of it. So I know that, it's real because there's nothing in it. In fact, there's, only bad in it for you. And then I'll finally end with this, and this is what convinced me that the EMDR memories that I was able to recover are real. My father, I learned after talking to some people in the family about what happened to me, which was really hard, but it was also, for me, I had to do it because I just couldn't live in the closet. He had attempted to sexually assault a number of people, a number of women, females of all ages, including children, and one of them was in the dark room. It was very similar to what happened to me.
So that was an affirmation.
Yeah. So it was exactly, it was scary how similar it was. And that was hard because I really, part of me wanted to still be able to believe that it didn't happen. And, it just, the amount of evidence for me now is just overwhelming.
So here's a question from Ruby. She says, if the abuse is in your subconscious, won't it still affect you? And I know, Pam, your situation was different than a lot of people in that you were such a badass that you were able to block it out almost completely for 50 years or close to that, and then during that time, instead of becoming an alcoholic and being married 5 times and being horribly depressed, you've had a very successful career with some good companies. So can you talk about your dissociative defense mechanisms and how you were able to cope, even though you had this horrific dark secret lurking deep within your soul? What were those years like when you didn't know that you had this?
I told myself they were good.
Okay.
There were times, and I look back and there were a lot of signs. I abused a lot of drugs in my teenage years.
All right.
We had that talk. There's just about nothing very few things I didn't try. Heroin would be one of them.
You didn't try the heroin, but everything else.
Yeah, kind of everything in between. There were periods in my life where I drank heavily. I was careful because I knew that, I needed to not become an alcoholic. Um, Also, my husband will happily tell you that I do not like to be touched very much. I'm not a huggy, touchy kind of person, and that has always annoyed him. So, there were signs, and the other thing is, I think that probably I became a pretty good actress, but I'm also really good at denial. I can convince myself.
Seems like we were months and months and months into this, and you would still come in and say, "Yeah, my denial's working real hard to tell me this didn't happen," and you knew it did, but there was still a voice that was trying to block it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I unfortunately, yes. And also, I have found too that I tend to sometimes cut off my emotions. I somehow am able to just say, you know what, let's not feel anything. And, that's how I made it through.
Right. So here's a sort of a tongue-in-cheek question from Jackie. She says, "Hey, Mark, don't monsters like to hide in dark rooms?" And you don't mean a dark room, you mean a dark room, right? For photography development back before our fancy phones made our pictures. He was a photographer and he had a dark room.
Yes, he had a dark room, yeah. He also definitely abused me in my bedrooms, the various bedrooms I had as a child. But one of the things, people get, one of the things that helped me was to try to not focus on my abuser and try to focus on me. Because you can start going down a really bad, negative path, and you will have, sadness and absolute pure rage. But healing's about you.
So, all you church for the narcissistically abused folks, I know you've never heard anybody tell you that you should be busy focusing on your own healing and not majoring on the horrificness of the narcissist. So that's a good message, Pam, because the only person you can really heal is yourself.
Yeah.
So keep the questions coming in, folks. So Pam, a lot of folks who've been through really bad narcissistic abuse, they were more married to somebody like that, and they get a divorce, and the narcissist has better lawyers, and there's harassment, and many times people are financially destroyed. Sometimes they'll go through two or three bouts of destruction with a narcissist. So many of them aren't able to afford an EMDR. But can you, without insurance, what's the ballpark of what a typical hour-long EMDR session, or how long is it, an hour and a half? And what's the cost?
So the sessions that I was doing and am still doing are $150 an hour. I would also say, and Mark, you recommended a lot of these things to me. There are things like, and I'll recommend right here. There's a woman called Adrienne on YouTube. If you Google yoga and Adrienne, yoga was really helpful to me.
Yeah.
You can also look into meditation. You can buy books on meditation. I'm sure there are videos on meditation. I tried doing some meditation, and I did find it somewhat helpful. Also, guided meditation you can download for like $10. What was the name of her Mark, you had recommended.
Bella Ruth Napperstack.
Yep, yep. I used her guided meditations, and I actually found them to be very helpful. So there are other things that you can do.
Yeah. Did insurance help cover some of the costs?
Yes, I was actually pleasantly surprised that insurance did cover, I think, like roughly 70%. I have a very good health insurance plan through work.
Wow.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Semper. He asked, Pam, was your father ever prosecuted for his crimes, or did he ever admit them?
I haven't talked to him since I recovered memories. So he does not know that I know. I believe he's a pretty mentally unstable person. I'm not even sure that he truly would remember. He has not been prosecuted. I have two options. One would be to try to press criminal charges. The other would be to sue him. I, right now, can't face him in a court. Can't do it. No way. I think I have about another year to consider whether or not I want to attempt it. I think that's one of the flaws in our laws, that in many states, you have this like window, and I don't know, when you've just gone through trauma and all this stuff, I just can't do it. I'm like finally able to go in a grocery store again. I'm not going to jeopardize my healing.
So yeah, your recovery process is first. I have a cute little comment, and then I have a question for you, Pam. Someone said, let's see, Ruby Girl says, Lisa Romano says, or actually it was Annie, says she calls everyone dear ones, which I like and is very sweet. My style, I call everybody dude. If you're a woman, you're a dude. If you're a dude, you're a dude. You got to go with what you got. So, so the question, Pam, is you're through the vast majority of your healing. You're back to work half time now, but don't reveal the school, but maybe the topic. You're beginning training for a new career. Tell us about that.
Sure. It's an interesting thing. I had some issues in my job. There were some internal positions that I applied for and didn't get, and I was kind of disappointed with where I was in work. Although I will say it's a fantastic company, and I've been very happy there. But I also kind of felt like, gee, sort of, what do I want to do when I retire? Or do I want to do something different? And when this happened to me, what became very clear to me is that I have this experience, and boy, was it, painful to get it, but I could use it in a positive way. And so I started pursuing my master's degree in social work. And my goal is actually to become an EMDR therapist. I don't think that they're anywhere near enough. And Mark had come up with the idea of doing it online, and I actually found an article. It was a study looking at whether or not you could effectively do EMDR through telemedicine. So who knows, maybe in 4 or 5 years, I will be attempting to make that possible, because I think that it's a therapy that needs to be much more widely available.
I do think, Pam, that you have a future of being a champion for EMDR. You might already have the world record for number of EMDR sessions logged. I don't think Guinness Book of World Records has that category yet, but you must be close. So you do some writing. You have a blog. We're wanting to sort of conceal your identity a little bit, just for privacy and safety. But tell us about your blogging.
Sure. I actually blog on a discussion board. And Mark, tell me how much you think that I should share here. One of the things that I have found to be very helpful to me, and one of the first things I did, I didn't know anybody I didn't think I knew anybody who had been sexually abused. And I felt like, a total freak, I guess is the best way to describe it. When I first started to come to terms with the fact that I had been sexually molested. So I looked for other people online, and I found an online community, and in that online community is the ability to have a diary. And so I've actually started that diary, and I've documented, every week of doing EMDR. So you can kind of see my ups and downs. And it really has been helpful to me to connect with other people. One thing I will say is my experience has been in terms of online chat boards. They're not very active, which I think is very sad for people who are going through the process of dealing with sexual abuse, because talking to somebody else who has been there, there's really nothing that can replace that.
Hey, Pam, we got a comment from Jackie. She says, tell Pam if you're a freak, then you're a pretty freak.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Another comment from CD. I like how you stated that regarding contact between you and your father, it's not the focus, rather focusing on your own healing process. Thank you. That's very good advice.
Yeah, I will. The one thing I will say is I learned that after obsessing about his narcissistic personality disorder. And I said to myself, once I started to get into this, you know what? That doesn't matter focus on you.
Right. Okay, so another question. During your work, you had one of your longtime pets, one of your doggies, have to be put to sleep. And then you went out and got the world's most adorable puppy that Karen and I used to marvel at. Your puppy's now turned into a horse. But can you talk about the loss of a pet and then the gaining of a new pet during your process?
Sure. Our previous dog, I loved. I mean, he was, like a member of our family. Everybody loved him. He was not a good dog, but we loved him anyway.
Everybody loved him, but he was a bad dog.
He was a bad dog. He never was really fully house trained.
Oh, that is bad.
And we kind of let him get away with that because he was really cute. And he died. He actually just died. He was not that old, but old enough to die of old age, and he did. It happened at a time when, I had just started to come to terms with things, and it was just the worst freaking time, because I really find that pets are very comforting. And so we went for several months without a dog, and then I kept at my husband every day. And I got the puppy right before I started the medical leave of absence from work, and I was really kind of falling apart, although Mark doesn't believe that. And I thought, this is either the best thing I've ever done or the worst thing I've ever done. And it turned out to be the best. I actually think that for people who have, gone through trauma, having that pet can be the reason why you get up in the morning. For me, it most certainly was. I would have, been just as happy to not get out of the bed, but I wanted to go see the new dog.
Yeah. Another question, we used so many different modalities of treatment. You read books, you did yoga, you did EMDR, you did puppy therapy, but you also went away for a week to on-site. Tell us about that experience for you.
It was a wonderful experience. I'm trying to think about, I was really nervous. Because you're there with complete strangers, you share a room with complete strangers.
Tell a little bit about what on-site is. We talk a lot about it, but describe it a little bit before you. I know it was a big part of your story, sort of evolving and being able to tell your story. But tell them a little bit about on-site.
It is like a 1-week therapy program, and I'm fairly new to doing therapy. But it's really an intense therapy program. Every single piece of it, you're there, and it all kind of builds up in a way. And there are many different elements to it. A lot of it provides you with tools that you kind of take away with you to be able to use when you get back home. It gives you an opportunity to bond with people. It also uses, and it was really fascinating because I think that in some ways, like EMDR, it was able to pull things out of me that I couldn't get otherwise. Through the sculpting, you actually, sort of do almost like a little play of different scenes from your life, and I really did find that helped to help to loosen some things, but I also made wonderful connections to people who both of my roommates had parents who were narcissists, so we had something right there to bond.
The daddy narcissist dorm you were in, I think.
Yeah, I said actually it wasn't there. I think for both of them it was their mother, but I said I know why they put us together. We all
Right.
Have a narcissistic parent.
Okay, so Pam, another question. Since I met you until now, you really seem like a different person because EMDR, it fundamentally speeds up the rewiring of your personality. So how is all that rapid change in a relatively short amount of time, how's that impacted your marriage?
I would say probably it's all been positive. It has forced us to talk about things at a much deeper level. For me, I'm working through one of the things that happened to me, and please, this sounds bizarre, but you, for some reason, project on your spouse, or at least I did, my father. And so sometimes when my husband would, even reach out to just hug me, my brain just went father, and I would just freeze.
That's not bizarre at all. That makes a lot of sense.
So actually through EMDR, and that's one of the interesting things that EMDR can do, beyond processing traumatic memories, you can sort of embed positive stuff.
Nice.
And we were able to, through the EMDR, separate my husband from my father. And it's funny because my husband is like his polar opposite. So I did very well in selecting a spouse. but he's like the polar opposite. So I, through the EMDR, separated them, and that actually was very, very helpful.
So here's an interesting question, Pam. So you're opening up to us. I know you opened up quite a bit to the group members at On-Site. And CD says she thinks it's amazing how open you are in sharing. But did you find it difficult to talk about your abuse with your father to people who knew him? I guess that would be relatives and friends. And was there a part of you that was afraid of their responses?
Yeah, I was terrified. Yeah, I was absolutely terrified. I spent so much time worrying about what I would say, who I would say what to, when I would say it. It was tough. I would go through like who's easiest first and sort of build my way through. And some of it I just, I said, you know what, I know I should have a conversation with this person, but I can't do it. I'm just going to write an email and I'm going to send it out to people. And you know what? I'm healing. I'm a mess. And I'm going to give myself permission to do it that way. And so that's what I would say, find what is comfortable for you. And to me, being able to be open and talk with people, I am not going to live my life in a closet. I'm not the one who, should be feeling ashamed.
That's right.
The shame is not mine.
That's right. That's right. A couple more questions from me about your process and about your future. One is, so you found me on a YouTube video. I think it was the one about the Revenant, about the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we've been doing therapy via Skype. How has therapy via Skype worked for you?
It's funny. I wondered how effective it would be. But in some ways, and I think I told you this, Mark, I'm able to be more open because you're not actually a person in the room. So I feel this ability to kind of say anything.
I'm not a man. I'm a cartoon character. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, yes, and it was kind of strange to end up in therapy with a man discovering that you were sexually abused by your father. I mean, it was just so screwed up.
But in a way, the Skype part made it safer for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and also very convenient because I can tune in from home.
Yeah. And there were times where you'd take a break at work and you just go into a room and we had sessions from your workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another question. We've got about 13 minutes to go. So if people have more questions, Pam, send them in. But so I know that you're a writer and that there's a part of you that wants to chronicle your experience. Certainly not pressuring you, but is there a book in your mind and heart around this that you'll someday get around to putting, out into the universe?
I hope so. In fact, when I was feeling not terrible while I was on medical leave, I actually wrote a lot. So I actually have a fair amount of book already written. I also think that I'll have my diary that I kept that I can pull from. I hope someday that there is. But right now I'm really committed to doing my master's degree. And the one thing I will say is it's a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. But it's definitely, the more I get into it, the more I love it. And right now, that's my focus. And, of course, work. And my family, and,
So Jackie says the show is flying by tonight, which means it's, really interesting. It also means that when I do the show by myself, the show sort of drags. Is how I took that, Jackie. Anyway, there was a good question here by Diane. She asked, is it possible that perhaps EMDR doesn't work for some people?
I don't know. I have read a couple of things where people said it didn't work for me. The one thing that I would, again, emphasize is or maybe I didn't emphasize it before, you need to find someone who really knows what they're doing. Just because they say they do EMDR, I would check and make sure that they have been doing EMDR for several years, that it's a major part of their practice. If you're lucky enough to have a fair number of people in the area, see if people do referrals to them. That's a good sign.
And then the other thing is Francine Shapiro, who founded this therapy. They have a training program and a certification program. And some people may, read a book and go to a 2-day seminar and they proclaim themselves EMDR therapists. Whereas I think you're, Pam and I are having a contest to see who can blow our nose loudest. So give us some
Did
feedback.
I win? Yeah.
I think you might be pulled ahead. I've sort of ran out of boogeriness to compete. But
tissues.
but wasn't Lynn pretty trained pretty extensively?
Yes, she is the person who gets referrals. In fact, I asked my psychiatrist to help me find someone, and she did. That was who she had recommended. So yeah, I would just say make sure that you find somebody who really knows what they're doing.
So, Jackie, you're hoping that we see Diane's question. Is Diane's question, I think my trauma is too complex. Is that the question that we're talking about? And I would say to that, in terms of years and severity of sexual abuse, Pam, that you're in 30 years, you're probably the client that experienced the longest and the worst sexual abuse. So that's a pretty complex case. And the EMDR worked because of the depth and complexity of the case. It doesn't just work on simple cases, it works on the hardest cases imaginable, right?
I don't think I'm really qualified to answer that. I would look into it. I don't think that there is anyone who is, too traumatized to be able to do EMDR. It's used for very serious trauma.
But if you were too traumatized, you wouldn't have made the cut. I don't think, Pam, given your history. I think so. It definitely. I think it's worked. There's not too many therapeutic miracles, and there wasn't any magical therapist with fairy dust and a magic wand. It was grunting it out. 3 sessions of EMDR, 1 session with me, lots of naps, lots of reading, for month after month after month. But on the other side of it, I think it's about as close to a therapeutic miracle as I've seen.
Yeah, I've actually said that I think that if EMDR was a medicine, it would be the most widely used medicine in the United States, and it would probably cost, I don't know, $50,000, $80,000 a year would be my guess. It's very sad that it's not used a whole lot more. And I also want to say that I am convinced that if I hadn't been able to find something that really worked well for me, I would be on permanent disability. I was not doing well when I stopped working. And even during the recovery, it was rough, but I'm feeling a whole lot better.
Yeah. So I'm a pretty good talk therapist, and we were able to identify the abuse and bring some of it to the surface, but about as far as I could take you on healing the abuse was being real depressed and losing your voice. as good as we could do. So there are limitations to traditional talk therapy, and we never could have gotten to the memories or to actually healing parts of your brain and parts of just your whole system without the EMDR work.
Yes, and also, anybody who's watching can do this. You can Google EMDR. There are studies that have been done to, really evaluate how effective it is. And it's effective. It's more effective than the drug regimen over the long term, the drug regimen that's used to treat PTSD.
Right. So here's another comment. Jill Gain says, I'm still embarrassed, or she probably has shame, just thinking about having to dredge all that up again. And I guess, Pam, you can speak to this, but from an observer watching you go through the whole thing, it didn't feel like, to me, it didn't look like you were actively trying to unnaturally dredge something up. It sort of looked like you were like, I don't know, giving birth to a baby in a way. It was like something in you that had to come out, and it was messy and it was painful and you needed a midwife. How would you describe the process of dredging versus giving birth versus projectile vomiting? I don't know what metaphor you would use.
It was probably all of the above. What I will say is doing the EMDR and having your body do sometimes absolutely obscene things is, not during the moment, but as you're thinking like, oh, I hope that I don't pull up that memory and go through those motions again. So that was a little bit embarrassing, but this is where courage comes in. But you know what? Here's the bottom line is this. Love yourself enough to be able to do it. That's the only way from here to there. And don't let, fear that, it's going to be embarrassing, hold you back. You're worth more than that.
Yeah. So we've talked about your future as an EMDR therapist and perhaps writing a book. But what do you think that the next 30 years hold for you in your personal life, in your marriage, with your children? How do you think all the healing will impact that part of your life?
This is so weird to say, but for the first time in my life, I know who I really am.
Nice.
And I also am listening to me. I might have become a social worker, I don't know, when I in college, but I didn't really have the ability to listen to me and to really say, I know what everybody else is telling me to do, but what do I want to do? And so, and also I will say too that I have found that my perspective has changed a bit. Some of the things that I used to care about, I really just don't care about anymore. And I've gotten kind of much more spiritual, which I really wasn't at all before. But, just appreciating things like nature. So, I think the next 30 years for me probably holds a lot more openness, hopefully helping a lot of people, hopefully having a much deeper relationship with my husband and not cringing sometimes when he, reaches out to hug me.
Your husband might be open to that prospect.
Yeah.
I would think. Okay, so we're about at wrap-up time. I can see everybody's comments. So no more questions, but any sort of parting thoughts or comments that anybody wants to say to Pam. Jackie says this site has been very healing. Robert says when you discover your higher inner self, that's sort of the process of healing. But if you have any other parting comments for Pam, then type it in. Pam, Jackie says, is Pam coming back?
Oh, no.
You guys remember Johnny Carson? The Johnny Carsons? I'm so old, I remember Johnny Carson.
I remember Johnny Carson, too.
And it's like some famous movie star, comes on and the ratings go up. But if you're just stuck with Johnny, it's not quite as cool. So Jackie says, we love Pam. Ruby Girl says, a heartfelt thanks. Jackie says, here's Johnny. Dawn says, thank you, Mark and Pam. Great stream show. Jilligan says, thank you so much, Pam. You've helped me, definitely. CD is asking, Pam, if you do any inner child work. I'll answer that for you, CD. Pam's not allowed to do inner child work because she's still healing her own inner child. But she's got a very bright future in this world as a healer. But I don't want to turn her loose quite yet until she's completed some of the healing that she's done. Sideways on the Highway says, thanks for sharing, Pam. Someone says we're aging ourselves by knowing who Johnny Carson was. Diane says, good night, everybody. Jackie says, Pam, you have a beautiful spirit.
That's very sweet.
Annie says, good night, Pam, and everybody. Thanks for your transparency. So, Pam, do you have any parting? First, let me ask you, what was this experience like for you to very publicly share your story? This has probably been seen by 200, 300 people live in and out. Within a week, it'll be 1,000 people. Dawn says you're a badass. But what was this experience like for you?
Well, I can tell you right now, Mark, as you went through the hundreds of people, my knees started trembling. It was in some ways cleansing. And also, as I was hearing people say that I helped them, and you don't understand it until you're there, but that actually helps me in my healing. It just does. So I want to thank everybody who has experienced some, help or healing from this, because that, helps me too. And I guess, I'll say once again, harness your inner badass.
That Jackie says you're bad to the bone. CD says, thank you for sharing and answering all the questions and letting us put you on the spot. Okay, everybody. This show did go a lot quicker. This is a very, very compelling story. I believe we will see Pam again down the road when the time is right. And you'll be able to see even further healing down the road. So thank you so much, Pam, for sharing your story and opening up your heart. I thought it was a good idea because I thought it would help your recovery and your healing process. And I think it probably has.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. All right, Pam, I will see you in our regular therapy session.
Yep.
And we will see you on the show down the road. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, y'all. Wonderful show. Much love to all you guys. Have a wonderful week. Again, if you're interested in the coach's training, send me an email, marksmith@familytreecounseling.com. We'll talk about, we want to create a small army of well-trained people like Pam here who can handle the onslaught, the tsunami of the millions and millions of people who are suffering and will be suffering from narcissistic abuse syndrome. So thank you for watching. We love you. God bless. Good night.